And now I'm going to introduce our panelists. As I do, I'd ask you to please join me up here and take a seat. First, we have Subrahmanyam Goparaju, or Subu as he likes to be called. Subu is Vice President and Head of Software Engineering and Technology Labs, or SET Labs, at Infosys. At Infosys, SET Labs is the technology and research arm of the company, forging all the innovations that Infosys is so famous for. He also heads the Microsoft Technology Center for Infosys. Sue, would you please come up? Next, we have Lalitesh Katragadda. Lalit received his master's and doctor's degrees in computer science and robotics from Carnegie Mellon. He was involved in the Carnegie Mellon Lunar Rover program. He created a robotics startup which was then acquired by Google, and he's been with Google ever since. And in fact, he's the founding co-center head for Google's research center here in Bangalore. Lalit? Pradeep Khosla is an alumnus of Carnegie Mellon, receiving his PhD in ECE from Carnegie Mellon, and now serves as our Dean of the Carnegie School of Technology, or the College of Engineering, a position he's held since 2004. Pradeep's done a phenomenal job as Dean, and you'll get a taste of that during the panel. He's also been an outstanding professor, continues to be an active one. He also holds the chair of the Philip and Marcia Dowd University Professor. He was the founding director of the SciLab, which I referred to before in my remarks, and of ISIS, which I also referred to, and was head of our ECE department before becoming Dean of Engineering in 2004. He's received many awards, including a very significant award from the IIT Pan Alumni Association, and was elected into the U.S. National Academy a couple years ago, the highest honor an engineer can receive in America. Pradeep Khosla. Harsh Manglik is also an alumnus, having received his MBA from GSIA, now the Tepper School. He's also a parent of a current student, a student in our Heinz College. Harsh serves as chairman of Accenture India, as well as being the geography managing director for India. He serves as the senior voice and manager for all of Accenture activities in India, both focused on the Indian market and in the way Accenture India supports their global businesses. Before that, he worked at Symantec Corporation and IBM in the US for many years. We're delighted he could be part of this panel tonight. Harsh Manglik. Okay, let me get wired up here. How about now? Excellent, thank you. Okay, let me get us started here with a question for you, Subu. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'm not picking on you because you're the only non-alumnus in the group, but we're gonna start with you. Tonight you are an honorary alum. How's that? But just for tonight. His company, of course, is known as one of the most innovative in the world. Infosys has had enormous impact in the world. Of course, a fantastic success story. He attracts and manages some of the brightest people in the world. And I have a couple of questions for you in particular. First of all, with regard to managing very bright people who are innovating, what are your biggest challenges in doing that? And how do you build and sustain a culture of innovation within the company?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. You already answered my question. I was wondering whether you really got the right Subu Goparaju, because I'm the only non-alumnus here. But anyway, there cannot be too many people with the same name. Yeah, so thank you. I think, to put it very simply, the biggest challenge is, given the kind of business we are in, we are really in the business of, as a services organization, we are really in the business of what I call innovatively applying information and communication technology in the context of the global 1,000 or global 2,000 kind of corporations. So again, given the kind of business we are in, we also believe that innovatively applying ICT can be a key differentiator in the growth of an organization. So while there are technology companies and the technology users, we are the people who are really helping people in applying this one. So as part of that, we actually work with several technology creators. Some could be very big platform companies, some could be startup companies, etc. But I think in our case, it really boils down to the timing aspect of that. When is a technology right for a solution or for universally applying in a context? So there are so many things going on, so many technologies available, so many startups, so many big platform companies, but which are given that there are, and so many different kind of challenges, especially many of them are articulated in the National Academy of Engineering's 14 grand challenges, etc. So many different possibilities, many different challenges, and you have limited bandwidth and limited resources to look at those things. So what are the right technologies to look at and what are the right problems to focus on is certainly a key challenge. And today, coming to people, I think many of these folks are very enthusiastic, very energetic, and I think in the last, especially the current generation, they're not afraid of failing. They actually try a lot of things. They're not conformists. So when they come up with very, very good ideas and are ideas which they believe are very powerful and very good, and when you have to actually choose from among those things a few, how exactly do you do that? And how do you basically make them see why you have chosen the ones you have chosen to invest in? And the last thing I would say is I think innovation itself has become a very collaborative thing. I think the days of building a product or a solution and directly taking to market kind of thing is passé now. Most of the innovations are probably happening in an ecosystem environment. So I think that actually along with it brings a need for most of the technology people to have not only technology skills, but the ability to actually work in an ecosystem, the leadership skills, the team skills, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you make them see the need for some of those things and build is another aspect of that.
Very good. I can see why Cent Labs has been so successful. That's a great answer. Your first point is a great lead into the question I want to ask Lalit. You said there's so many possible innovations and technologies out there, and a big challenge for you is choosing which ones to focus on. Lalit, you've been a phenomenal source of new ideas and products. If you like Google Maps, this is the guy to thank. It's quite remarkable. That's just one of many products he's led the development of. You're also, I know from our meetings together, very thoughtful about the state of the world and the challenges. If you had to choose one technology, and only one, you only get to choose one, what would that be? What would you want to focus on, and what problem are you trying to respond to?
So you gave me a way out with the last part of the question, which is I don't think I'll choose a technology. I think I'll choose a problem. And the particular problem I would choose, which I think will occupy us for the next probably 20, 30 years, can be summarized by, essentially applying Green's theorem to resources, which is, can we find a way to essentially create an environment where the 6 billion on the planet can live in a developed world where del R remains 0, which is the net amount of incremental resource we use is 0. Now that's a big ask because we are at a point where the rate of increase of R is not 0 yet. So getting to the point where del R is 0 is a long way away. But I think that is a problem we need to solve. One of my favorite authors is Isaac Asimov. And he wrote this series of books called the Foundation series. And in foundation, they discovered that by mathematical modeling that, their galaxy is going to destroy itself because of wars. And so they create this foundation on the edge of the galaxy called Terminus. And Terminus has a peculiar problem where they have no resources. And Terminus innovates itself way out of all these problems and becomes the dominant force in the galaxy, and then over time stabilizes the galaxy. So in many ways, India, to that, to give that analogy, is sort of like Terminus. And I call it the Terminus effect, where the early set of innovations we are seeing, which use much smaller amount of resources, like a factor of 10 to a factor of 100, but creating the same kind of development are starting to happen. But I think we need to take them on as an institutional challenge and do it on a much larger scale. I mean, there are things like the cell phone revolution, which everybody is aware of, the smaller cars, and so on and so forth. When I graduated from Carnegie Mellon, our valedictorian speech was, not valedictorian, but the graduation speech was given by Dr. Raj Reddy, who happens to be one of my mentors, Pradeep being the other one, although he looks very young. He was my mentor. And he said that, go forth and solve problems which impact the illiterate, the handicapped, and the poor, essentially the disadvantaged. And what was interesting about that statement, he was talking about the majority of the planet. And I don't think we have solved that problem yet. And the Google Maps example you gave, I won't bore you with the technology, but when we moved to this part of the world, we realized that there are no maps, not only in India, but in most of the world. And maps are very, very expensive. So we had to make generation of maps, one, something that users could do, because the Bangalore map that you have today is outdated within 6 months, because Bangalore is in hypergrowth. And two, we had to make it a factor of 100 cheaper. And the reason I had personal interest in this problem is not because maps is fun, which it is, but that was not the reason. The reason is that maps happens to be the underpinning for economic growth. There is this Nobel Prize nominee, Hernando de Soto, we were discussing this evening, who hypothesized that the key to economic liftoff for developing countries is to unlock the land that they're sitting on and capitalize the undercapitalized land they're sitting on. India itself is sitting on, by his own estimate, something like $40 trillion of land. And I think the easily capitalizable version is like $4 trillion. And the key to that is property rights and great maps. And without maps, property rights don't help. So, and we are starting to see that effect. People told me that today in Bangalore, if you go to BDA and try to register a property development plan, you need to submit a map and the map comes from Google. And so it's gratifying to see something like that happening. But all of that started with Raj Reddy's speech.
Great. Thank you, Lalit. Pradeep, I said before in my remarks and my introduction to you've been a great leader, education leader in engineering for Carnegie Mellon and throughout the country. I know you've also spent a lot of time thinking about engineering education here in India and the challenges that are faced here. Your observations about education in India, what's going right and what the challenges are would be valuable, I think, and add nicely to the piece of things we have on the table here.
Oh, okay. I'll be happy to think about this in real time. First of all, I'm really pleased to be here. It's so good to see so many people from Carnegie Mellon. I think the easy answer to that question is replicate what we have done in the US. And I'm not saying this, I'm saying this with a lot of gravity and seriousness. And here's the logic behind this. If you look post-World War II, the US has created unprecedented wealth. I mean, never in a 40-year history or a 60-year history has so much wealth been created in such a concentrated manner, number one. Number two, that wealth was not only created by the US, but it was also spread across the whole world. So if you look at this wave of economic prosperity that we are looking at now, through Europe, through Asia, through India, in fact, there's only one continent that's not been touched by it very effectively as yet, and that's Africa. But it's only a matter of time before it goes through Africa to come back to the US, right? And all of this has happened mainly driven by technology, And most of the technologies, a lot of these technologies clearly have been created by people like us who are well educated. But most importantly in the US, they've been created at the university, right? So here's the litmus test. So take Google, for example. Where was the core idea of creation of Google created? Stanford University.
I thought it was Carnegie Mellon.
Carnegie Mellon created the idea before that, but we didn't patent it. So
That's right.
we thought about it.
We thought about it.
They implemented it.
Yeah, right.
Right, Sun Microsystem, the same thing. So there are a lot of mega companies I can think of that have been created out of the university. Now run the same test in Europe. Can anybody tell me one company in Europe which is worth, let's say, more than 100 billion market cap that was created at a university? Probably not. Run the same litmus test in India. Can somebody tell me one company, and there are many companies in India who are doing spectacularly well, that was created out of a university like Google or Sun? Not really. And the problem is that we don't have in India two things. One is the notion of a great research university. We have great universities, don't get me wrong, so don't confuse a great university education institution with a great research university, which integrates education and research and opens up the innovative potential of people. Secondly, we don't have very good IP rights. I mean, we do have good IP rights in India, don't get me wrong again, but they have to be not only very good, but very strongly enforced. And so we need the notion, the equivalent of what Lalit was talking about, the map of IP rights. I mean, who created what, when, where, seriously, to enforce it well. And thirdly, we need to have a government policy that integrates research with economic development, creation of companies, encouraging entrepreneurs to go out there, right? But all of this is going to happen first through the establishment or creation of a great research university in the Indian context. A lot of money available out here, a lot of talent available out here, and I think that's what we should be focusing on. And if you do that right, it would have also a very big impact on the undergraduate education. Part of the reason, if you went to Carnegie Mellon as undergrad, your undergrad education is so good, and you could go back again 10 years later and be re-educated and not see the same notes, is because we as faculty integrate research into our education literally on a yearly basis. New ideas come out, the courses get modified, so on and so forth. So that would be my,
Good.
if you ask me for 2 or 3 words, which took me 200 words, 200 words.
No, that was very good, very succinct. Thank you, Pradeep. So let's get one more perspective on the table. Harsh, you're in a unique position because you serve virtually every significant company, every significant India around the world, but let's focus on India. So you have a perspective on what their challenges are, what their biggest problems are. And if you can summarize your views on that, maybe particularly in the context of the kinds of regulatory or policy changes you think would be helpful for your clients, that would be valuable.
Okay. Jerry, I'll give you a 2-part answer. From the point of view of the companies, actually it's not things like infrastructure or VAT or the movements of goods. If you step far enough back in order to gain perspective, I think it really comes into this issue of developing the talent proposition. I think if you look at the demographics of India, that's really the key to understanding the future of India. And if you look at that, that's both the power and the challenge. And if you look at the demographics, long history, long culture, ancient civilization, but it's the youngest country in the world today in terms of population. Median age 23.9, 1/3 of the population below 15 years of age. So that surge that is coming through, I think, is the secret to sustaining India's growth. But in order to realize that potential, I think there's this huge issue of how do you prepare the people who have the heart, who have the aspiration, who have the desire to engage and so on, but the education issue, all the way from primary education or whether it's vocational or college or graduate or advanced research, except for the fact of the few celebrated examples that we take perhaps inordinate pride on because they are not representative of what the reality of India is. I think they are representative of what India could be. I think this is the issue. And over time, as India continues to grow, the economy expands, the choke point will come on, are the people, where the raw talent exists, are they ready to engage and to sustain a career of innovation and relearning and tooling themselves over time? That's the challenge. And the second part of it, I would say, is again related to the realities of India, which is the combination of demographics, dispersion of the population. 2/3 of the population lives in rather inaccessible 650,000 villages. If you believe that problems are just the flip side of opportunity, I would say that there's a huge problem as well as a huge opportunity, which also, by the way, provides business opportunity. It is this: how do you get education to the people who are in very dispersed areas and the full spectrum of distribution of capabilities, so all types of education? How do you get modern style healthcare to people who are either underserved or non-served? And you can't do it by concentrating doctors and sending them to very dispersed populations. And it is perhaps also financial inclusion. So the reason I've chosen both these examples is, first of all, they are fundamental problems and therefore opportunities. And I think the way out of that will come out of innovating new models, new ways of thinking, and new solutions, which will, of necessity, have to leverage technology, but think about in new ways. And I think there are embedded policy implications of these, embedded implications, excuse me, for new ways of thinking. So that's my view.
Great. I have a question for all of you. I'll pose it, but don't answer quite yet. I want you to think about it while I say so. I guess yet another question is, can there be other Bangalores in India? Are there other Bangalores growing in India? Your thoughts about this would be valuable. Now, to the audience, when they're done having at this question, we'll invite your questions. So please be thinking about them, and we'll invite you to ask them in just a moment. So who'd like to start? Subbu, do you have you must have a deep insight into this, because...
No, actually, like you said, there are people who have chosen Bangalore. I mean, they've chosen to come to Bangalore. Maybe they can answer. But let me give my perspective anyway. I think at this point of time, you have, we'll come to why they have chosen separately. But today, if you see, there is an entire ecosystem of companies which are running out of Bangalore. You have, and if you take, I'm really talking from a ICT perspective, information and communication technologies. And given that we normally think of these things in stacks and layers, you have Intel at the bottom of the stack. Then you have companies like Microsoft, which are building operating systems and things like that. Then you have several infrastructure and product companies. And you have the complete, you have many services companies like Infosys, Accenture, IBM, TCS, etc. So I think the complete ecosystem is there. And today, you probably can think of newer innovations and then, like I said, build them and then take them to the customers or consumers without really going anywhere else. Now, over a period of time, maybe in the last 15 to 20 years, this has happened. Now, why each of these companies have chosen to come here? Maybe there are reasons like talent and weather and stuff like that, but whatever may be the reason, today this ecosystem got established, and today you can actually come up with an innovation and build the entire thing end to end and take to the market.
Let me take
crack at that. In fact, we were having this conversation just yesterday at ISC Bangalore. I was visiting Balki and Balram, who's the director. So if you look at Silicon Valley, for example, I think maybe with some argument, people would nearly agree that the creation of HP was the seed, the Big Bang, that created Silicon Valley, right? I mean, there were other companies around it, but I think approximately everybody agrees that. So I posed this question to Balki yesterday, who's the deputy director of ISC. I said, what was that seed? I mean, what was that Big Bang that happened in Bangalore that created this universe that we know of now? And I can tell you it's a different universe. I was here in 1980, and this was like a sleepy garden city. It was great to live here, no hassle, trees were green, everything was hunky-dory, food was cheap. Not anymore. I don't even recognize the roads. So it turns out that there was at that point an area designated out here called the export zone. And TI decided to establish its first lab here. But for TI to establish the lab, they needed a satellite link. And at that point, remember, until like 10, 15 years ago, India was a very controlled economy, both from a technology and economy, and just from every point of view. It was pretty socialistic. The chief minister of Bangalore, or whoever that authority was, I don't quite remember the exact person, basically got them a license to create a satellite link between TI through a satellite to TI back in the US. And they said, yep, this is where we're going to create the lab because we have the satellite link. That's what we need because we're moving software back and forth. ISC Bangalore at that point then became very creative. And they said, oh, you got a satellite link, you got connection to the net. We are going to connect to you now so that we will use your link so that we will have access to it. And I think since then, it's just now history that one thing followed the other. Motorola came soon after because TI was here, and then other companies came soon after because these two companies were here. So that is the folklore, at least. And I think it's about nearly correct. It's about nearly as accurate as HP created Silicon Valley.
Did Google and Accenture think about going elsewhere other than Bangalore, or was that just obvious that Bangalore was the place to be?
We actually started in Mumbai, and excuse me, very soon it became evident that Bangalore had to be an important center. Now, we are today in 6 cities, 18 locations, and who knows how we'll spread. But Bangalore was inviting because for many reasons. First of all, I think because of the history of Bangalore, there was a culture of technical sophistication, and I'll comment on that a little bit. Also, it's a very, very cosmopolitan environment. People here are, I don't know what's the historical reason, but remarkably open-minded. They have a global view. Their awareness level is very high. So it was easy to move into this environment. Now, the technical base existed because of the investments that the government had been making in public sector industries, which were largely technologically based. Yeah. And so I think that was a big factor. The weather didn't hurt either, by the way. But I think the general ambiance helped. In fact, I grew up in the north, and I moved back to India after a long time. And my wife loves it, and when I occasionally raise the issue of, so at some stage we'll go back, the question she asks me to think about is, what would it be like to live alone? She wants to stay on out here. I think the issue, though, is that I'll take a cue from what you said. Are there other Bangalores waiting to be created? And I was so struck by your statement about the contribution of Carnegie Mellon and University of Pittsburgh to revitalizing Pittsburgh. In Bangalore, the reality is, though, that of all the people who are working particularly in the technological and IT industries, half of them are migrants. So it is an unnatural act to force people to move in and work here. It's only because the other appropriate or similar opportunities right now are not elsewhere. I think it will be a more stable situation if, while Bangalore continues to grow, we seed other places as well. And I think there are great, if you look historically, where the evolution of modern India has been, there are many, many seats of areas where I think scholarship was developed, it has the right intellectual climate, et cetera. And I think that's the next wave, because you can only, it's like saying everybody in the US wants to move to New York City to work out there. Now, they may be moving there, but I think once other alternatives open up, it'll be more even development. And then these places can have their satellite feeders in second-tier, third-tier cities.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to comment on this?
No, I'll just give an anecdote. I think, so Google, when it came in, I was the junior most member of the 4-people team who created Google India. It was the first international office, or R&D office Google had. And so I got to write the document rationalizing where we'll go. So being a CMU graduate, I created a matrix. And the soft factors were actually not so soft, turned out. So whether the fact that you have a history of good schools, and Bangalore was perceived, and still is, I think, one of the freer cities in India. So I can go out and say things, and I can, be sort of have free expression. And there are not that many cities in India which have that character. So those turned out to be very important. And it's kind of economics, right? Those things do matter quite a bit, because at the end of the day, it's people. I think and Google, when we did eventually create Google India, we actually split it into two. R&D was put in Bangalore for those reasons. And operationally, infrastructurally, Bangalore was actually the worst city we analyzed and found. Hyderabad happened to be much more operationally smoother to deal with, at least at that time when we formed. So our larger office, which is the customer support and so on, is based in Hyderabad. Order of magnitude more employees and so on. So I think in the long run, in 10, 20 years from now, I think the inversion will happen in Bangalore. I think Bangalore will become more and more strong in R&D, and some of the services will flow out of Bangalore, mainly because of cost of living and other things. And the rest of India has the same advantage Bangalore used to.
Okay, audience, your questions. Don't be shy. Yes, there is
the role of language and its the diversity we have in India, how much that's going to play out in tapping into education or bringing to fruition its potential. As of today, it's a problem that we speak many languages. What's your solution for that? Or what's your take on it?
one could be Google Translator.
Did you say it's,
That's one answer.
he said it's a free city, so maybe you should answer this politically charged question.
So I think there are two parts to the answer. I think language will remain one of India's strengths, because language embeds a ton of cultural heritage. And the different points of view actually turn out to be an advantage when the other disadvantages are gone. Now, having said that, the main disadvantage is that we don't have the resources to develop educational content in many languages. And I don't think Google Translation is going to solve that problem anytime soon. So, or any other translation system. So I think what's going to happen is, I was seeing this study somewhere where a bunch of people working in some language center also chose to send their kids to English medium schools. I think that's going to be the norm. More and more governments, state governments are switching their kids to English medium. Sanity is being restored. So I think that will happen, and both of them will happen. So we will have, I think, this strong cultural heritage. So people will sort of be trilingual, if you will. They'll watch Bollywood in Hindi and educate themselves in English, and then speak the local language for fun. And I think all of it will work out. Now there is this interim period that I'm worried about, purely statistically, which is that in the next 10, 20 years, while people are getting educated and worrying about feeding themselves, making sure that the local languages don't wither. But I think it's a big enough country that the risk is low.
Isn't the education system already such, as, especially the K through 12 level, where kids have to take at least 3 languages? I mean, English, the local language, and another secondary language, and then a foreign language. And this foreign language definition is either French or Sanskrit, right? But Sanskrit being
Foreign language.
the mother of all the European languages, right? So that's the case right now, because I think kids take 4 languages.
At least 3. Yeah.
You're going to comment on Pradeep's thing about Sanskrit, and then make a few comments about regional languages. So I've been, for the last 3 years, trying to find a Sanskrit teacher.
You can't find
who there's great people, they are masters of Sanskrit in Bangalore. I want to learn it now because you are much younger than I, so Sanskrit may have been compulsory. It wasn't in my time. However, for the language thing, I think for college, university education, I don't doubt it at all that English will rapidly become the preferred medium of education. But let me take you back to the demographics of India. If you look at 2/3 of the population, which is out in rural areas, where today I think less than 40% of the school-eligible kids don't get into school. So, their economic conditions are poor. The basic medium of communication is their local language. It could be Tamil, it could be Kannada or Hindi up north. I think at that level, unless we find ways to introduce them to education and primary learning through the language that they are comfortable with, we have a problem. Now, over time, I think maybe English will become more prevalent, but to Lalit's point about cultural identity being embedded in the language, I think Indians will not give up their regional languages, and important that they don't. I see a resurgence. So, it is an issue that you can't develop a lot of content in the regional languages, but at least for purposes of education, I'm not sure if it is that hard to take the primary texts and the basic material, and I think there will be people within the large language clusters who will do it one way or another.
Good. Other questions?
There was one back.
Yes.
This is a question for Pradeep. Basically, you made a comment about research universities emerging in India. What can companies do? I understand that government has to institute policies and institutions should know more about IP rights. I'm just curious your thoughts on how companies could catalyze these research universities emerging.
How would companies be catalyzed by this research?
How can companies help in this regard?
How can companies help? Oh, thank you. That's a no-brainer. Companies can help by investing in this venture. So let's look at what's going on. So suddenly from 5 IITs, which were the creme de la creme, the elitist institutions in this country, we decide that to be more democratic, to give better access to everybody, we're going to create 17 IITs. Now, I guarantee you these other 12 IITs are having problems finding qualified to highly qualified faculty members. So now what we have done is diluted basically a good brand name by adding more of the same brand. But there's a way to fix it. And every company who's operating in India, I think, has both in its own self-interest and as a moral obligation, should be investing in developing PhDs out here who would do some good work. In the context of the good work, maybe create a company or two, or maybe go to a university and be a faculty and empower the IITs, or at least be good teachers in high schools. We need that too, right? So I think that's how companies can help, by being good citizens and not just be here for wage arbitrage or just to increase their EBITDA or whatever, right? You can do that. And that's another lesson to be learned, I think, from American companies. If you look at American companies, whatever city they are in or wherever their location is, they have been spectacular citizens. I mean, they contribute to their locality because without a healthy locality, you're not a healthy organization in that locality.
There's a question over here.
Hi, my name is Sahana, and I'm a prospective student for CMU. I was just wondering, you were talking about how universities need to be more research-oriented. What about high school students? Because right now in India, education is very textbook-based, and shouldn't innovation and inspiring innovation start from when you are in high school? Because then that's when you're going to university, that's when you have these ideas as a child. So isn't that a good time to inspire kids, and what can be done about that?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, you're the
It
president.
says here I am the moderator, not the answerer. Come on, Pradeep, you've thought.
I think we have to look at, so if you look at our system, right, there is way too much bureaucracy, both in terms of content and in terms of delivery mode. And then there is another layer of bureaucracy which actually mimics the UK system, where you have these colleges, but these colleges are under a single university called Cambridge or Oxford or University of Hull or something like that. We have to get away from that, create autonomous systems. And at the high school level, we have to get away from rote learning, because the rote learning that starts in high school propagates itself to the university, and a lot of talent and a lot of innovation potential is either killed or lost or dissipated for no good reason, right? So I would think that there has to be a new form of pedagogy, partly because of younger teachers, younger blood coming in, and partly because of education or technology-oriented education, as in using computer tools and computer tutors for individuals like you who seem to be rather focused and forward-looking and aggressive, to educate and train yourself to be more innovative in spite of your high school.
Yeah, that's the key.
Right.
In spite of it.
In spite of it. And I think this is where Jerry can talk about or answer this use of technology in education, which is the open learning.
Harsh, you wanted to comment on this?
Just want to build on what Pradeep said, and actually that young lady really asked a very pertinent question, because let's go back to the roots of the British-style system, which actually I started in, because my first love was physics. So I got into IIT, got in high. I said, I'm not going there. Told my dad, I'll do physics honors. And after 1 year, I called him and said, I'm coming home. I'll take the exam again. I did. And at IIT, my first love again was physics. So the British system of education actually was designed to produce clerks who'd work in offices, just do rote writing, etc. So innovation, the ability to sustain yourself over life and remain intellectually alive, has to be created, that comes from intellectual confidence, and that has to be created early. And it goes counter to a hierarchical approach to life, where you seek permission and you go with fear, to where there's a sense of experimentation, being able to make mistakes and say, oh, that's good, pick myself up. I would say that I think partly there are things that the culture of India has to evolve as well, because we are more authoritarian, more permission-seeking culture, even the way children are brought up, than I think can sustain the future. And two, I think even at the high school level, our approach and curriculum has to be more flexible. Today's approach, at least the mainstream approach, by the time you reach about 14 or 15, before you have any idea of what science and the excitement of science could be, or mathematics, or the arts could be, you have to lock yourself into a stream. And then from there on, you are locked into it for life. And heaven forbid that people actually enjoy the kind of environment that Carnegie Mellon creates, multidisciplinary, the same person being able to cross from, think liberal arts, humanities, and at the same time then go next day and bridge it with mathematics and science. I think we need a revamping of what education means.
I would actually, sorry, I would actually take Pradeep's last comment and treat it as a call to action for all of us. I was fortunate that my dad trained me that way, but I think those of you, I didn't realize they were high school kids here, but those of you who are still in school, I would take it personally to cultivate your own passion and cause. There's a cause inside each of us which is waiting to come out, so find it, cultivate it. And also cultivate a little bit of irreverence, because you're not going to make a difference by just following what everybody else has done. Carnegie Mellon, and the same call to action is to the CMU graduates who sort of take it for granted. We went to a school where you would call faculty by their first name. I immediately lapsed when I met Dr. Cohon and I called him Jerry, and that's how we created a egalitarian environment. And I would encourage you to cultivate that in your community. I mean, for reasons unknown to me, people kind of look up to CMU graduates, and that's kind of terrible. But given that they do, use that and be a voice for people following their passion and being a voice for true education, which is bringing it out.
You have kids, Lalit?
Two.
Actually, the last comment is a really good one, and let me just be blunt about this. I think stop calling people sir because of their rank or hierarchy. Do it when you respect them. I'm not saying don't respect your elders, but just calling somebody sir because he's your boss is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Great. So half the people in the Subrahmanyam get fired tomorrow and they say, hey, Anil, how's it going today? You're out. It's a great question. You see how strongly people agree with that.
But can I just
agree.
add
Oh,
one thing to
please,
that?
go ahead, Sue.
Now,
Oh,
well, I agree this stuff, but I think a lot of that is changing, in my opinion, because he talked about irreverence and things like that. I'm facing a lot of that at home, by the way.
Yeah, good.
So, in fact, I have two of my daughters. They go. I see their question papers sometimes in their assessments. They are not like the kind of papers that we were used to. Today, the stuff is more like giving a statement and why do you think it is like this? And many of those things are actually not there in their textbooks, right? So a lot of that is changing, especially in private schools. Maybe it's not common in government schools and things like that yet, but it is actually forcing them to think what the root cause is, what the reason is, and it is actually encouraging them to ask this question, why? And like I said, maybe this questioning is becoming a bit too much for me at home to my own liking, but they are actually being encouraged.
But how representative it is?
It is not. That's my point.
1 billion people.
It's
So
not-
I think there has to be a
Right.
systemic transformation.
Good. Well, we agree on that one. We only have time for one last question. Does someone have the mic already? She's got the mic. She wins. Sorry about that.
Well, thanks for letting me ask the last question.
Better make it good, since it's the last one.
Okay, I'll make it good then. I'm a recent graduate from Carnegie Mellon, and so I've only been in Bangalore for about just over a year now. But what has not escaped my attention is that there are IT parks being built almost all over the place, especially in areas slightly outside of the city, city's outer limits. My question is to any or all of the panelists, do you really think it's a good idea to keep expanding in a city which is so clogged up already, with a city that really, does not have any plan for, or, has a lack of urban planning? Is Bangalore really the future, or are other cities or areas in India, the way to go?
While they're thinking of good answers to that question, let me just point out that the theme for our panel in Mumbai was sustainable development and urban design. And it's be a toss-up as to which city is growing more chaotically, Bangalore or Mumbai. It's a very relevant question for every large urban area, but especially in India today. Does anybody have a good answer to that question?
Well, I don't know if there's a good answer, but I think what is missing is a deep understanding of policy issues. So, for example, if you look at cities around the world, there is clearly a better understanding now about how innovation happens, and there are cities that are called innovation clusters, where the state government or the federal government or the city government creates this seed, starts that initial bang in that Big Bang Theory, and which then leads to a lot of good things, right? So, for example, building around a university, for example, building arts and culture in a very strong way into a city, which brings more intelligentsia into the city, which brings more educated people into the city, building a university around it. What I see is that most of the cities or most of our politicians are lacking a reasonably good understanding of these policy issues and how to implement and think about them in the context of their own cities and their own states. And I think it might be worthwhile if these politicians took some lesson from C-STEP. C-STEP is this think tank out here, which is created by Carnegie Mellon faculty. It's independent, it's on its own, and they're doing some spectacular work. I see a couple of people out here, and it might be worth your while to go visit that place and tell your politicians to go visit that place.
It definitely, the city needs a plan, you're right. Great. Please join me in thanking our panelists again for a very stimulating discussion.